You are listening to Silent Waves Radio, and I need to ask everyone within earshot to please stop what you are doing and listen carefully. My name is Alex Mercer. It is a clear morning, and everything that you understood to be ordinary about this day is no longer ordinary. We have been covering a rapidly developing situation for the past 47 minutes, and what began as fragmented diplomatic signals out of 3 separate capitals has now crystallized into something that our editorial team has never in the history of this network had to say aloud. The governments of the Russian Federation, the People's Republic of China, the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, and the Islamic Republic of Iran have, in coordinated statements released within 17 minutes of each other, issued formal declarations of war against the United States of America. I want to say that again slowly. 4 nations, coordinated declarations. We have confirmed this through 6 independent diplomatic sources, through wire agency reports from Reuters, AP, and AFP, and through statements now appearing on the official government portals of all 4 nations. This is not a cyber attack on information systems. This is not a drill. This is not a diplomatic misunderstanding being walked back. We are reading the documents ourselves as we speak.
Alex, I want to add to what you've just said, and I want to speak directly to the people listening right now, whether you're in your car, at your kitchen table, sitting at a desk at work. Wherever you are, I need you to understand that what we are going to do on this broadcast is give you facts. Real, verified, sourced facts as fast as we can confirm them. We are not going to speculate. We are not going to catastrophize beyond what the evidence tells us. But I also want to acknowledge something because I think it would be dishonest not to. If you felt your stomach drop when Alex said those words, that is a human response. That is appropriate. What we are describing has not happened in the lifetime of the vast majority of people listening to this frequency. So stay with us, stay calm, and please, if you have family members who need to hear this, get them near a radio. Because in moments like this, verified information from a trusted source is the most valuable thing you can have.
We're going to go through what we know in sequence, starting with the declarations themselves. The Russian declaration, released through the state-controlled TASS news agency and simultaneously through the Kremlin's official communications office, cites what it describes as, and I'm reading directly from our translation team's rendering, the continued aggressive encirclement of the Russian Federation by American-sponsored military alliances, the illegal seizure of assets belonging to the Russian state, and the direct military support of combatants targeting Russian citizens. The document is 22 pages long. Our analysts are going through it now. The Chinese declaration, released by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Beijing and confirmed by Xinhua news agency, is longer, 31 pages, and cites what it describes as economic aggression, the arming of Taiwan, interference in what it calls China's internal territorial affairs, and what it terms a century of deliberate strategic humiliation. The North Korean declaration is shorter, 6 pages, and is largely symbolic in its language, pledging solidarity with its allied nations. The Iranian declaration runs 19 pages and focuses heavily on sanctions, regional military presence, and what it calls American-sponsored destabilization of the Islamic world.
I want to take a moment and put some human texture on what those documents mean in practice, because they are not just papers. We have already received our first listener messages in the last 20 minutes, and I want to read one of them now. A listener who signs her name only as Marcia from Dayton writes, I just woke up and my husband has his phone in his hand and he's reading me something and I don't understand what's happening. We have 3 kids. The oldest is 14. What do we do right now? And Marcia, I want to answer you as honestly as I can. Right now, the answer is to stay where you are. There are no active strike reports on American soil as of this moment. Federal emergency authorities have not issued evacuation orders. Keep your radio on. Keep your phone charged. Stay close to your family. We will tell you the moment the guidance changes, and we will tell you clearly and without hesitation.
We're now about 1 hour and 12 minutes into the initial reports, and I can tell you that we are beginning to see the first governmental response from Washington. The White House press office has issued a brief holding statement, 3 sentences, which reads, "The President of the United States is aware of the declarations issued by the governments of Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran. The President is in consultation with the National Security Council, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and key congressional leaders. A formal address to the nation is being prepared." That is all they have said publicly. The State Department has been unreachable for comment for the last 40 minutes. Pentagon spokesperson lines are busy. We are attempting contact through every channel available to us. The National Security Agency has declined to comment, which is standard procedure. We have one confirmed report from a Capitol Hill correspondent that the House and Senate have been called into emergency closed session, but that has not been confirmed by a second source yet, so treat it with appropriate caution.
While Alex continues to monitor those channels, I want to talk about what is happening overseas right now, because these declarations did not emerge from a vacuum, and the people already living inside the impact zone of whatever follows are not here in the studio. They are in cities, in homes, in hospitals, in schools, on streets right now. Our correspondents in Tokyo, Seoul, Warsaw, and Riyadh have all checked in within the last 30 minutes. From Tokyo, our correspondent Nakamura reports that Japanese defense officials are in emergency session and that civilians near American military installations, particularly around Yokosuka Naval Base, are being advised by local authorities to be alert but not to panic. She says the streets around the base are notably quieter than usual for a weekday morning. In Seoul, the situation is significantly more tense. Our correspondent there, we'll call him R for now because he asked us not to use his name, reports that South Korean air defense systems have been activated, not fired, activated, and placed on ready status. That is a formal military posture. That matters.
We're now crossing the 90-minute mark since those declarations hit the wire. And in the last 10 minutes, we have received our first confirmed military movement reports. I want to be very careful here, because in a situation like this, misinformation spreads faster than facts, and we are not going to contribute to that. What we can confirm, the United States Navy's 7th Fleet, which operates out of Yokosuka, Japan, has been ordered to battle stations. That confirmation comes from a Department of Defense spokesperson who issued a one-sentence written statement 5 minutes ago. The U.S. Air Force bases in Okinawa and Guam have gone to DEFCON 3. I want to explain what DEFCON 3 means for listeners who may not be familiar. It is the third of 5 levels on the Defense Readiness Conditions scale. It means Air Force ready to mobilize in 15 minutes. It does not mean nuclear launch authority. It does not mean an attack is imminent, but it is 2 steps above peacetime normal. And it tells you clearly how seriously the Pentagon is treating what has happened in the last 93 minutes.
3 hours now. We have been on the air for 3 hours, and the tone of this broadcast is beginning to change in ways I want to flag for you directly. When we started, we were reading diplomatic documents. Now we are reading military movement reports. That shift is significant. I also want to read another listener message because the volume of messages we are receiving is extraordinary, and I think they need to be heard. This one comes from a man who identifies himself as Sergeant First Class David, now retired in Fayetteville, North Carolina. He writes, "I served 22 years. I know what mobilization sounds like. I'm not scared. I'm sad. I'm sitting here with my wife and we are watching the clock and trying to figure out if we call our son who's active duty or if we wait. What do we tell him? What do you tell a soldier's mom? David, I don't have an answer worthy of that question, and I won't pretend to. What I can tell you is that you are not alone in asking it. and we will keep this line open for as long as it takes.
We have just received, and I want to pause the other threads of this conversation for a moment. We have just received confirmation from our Beijing correspondent that Chinese naval vessels, specifically carrier battle groups associated with the Shandong and Liaoning carriers, have moved out of their home ports and are now in the South China Sea in what is being described by two separate defense analysts as an offensive posture. This is not a training exercise departure. These ships left their ports after the declaration. We also have reports from our Moscow correspondent that Russian strategic bomber aircraft, specifically Tu-95 Bear bombers, have been scrambled from Engels Air Base in the Saratov region. These aircraft are capable of carrying long-range cruise missiles. They are currently flying north along their own coast, which is a standard route. But they are airborne, and they are armed. I want to be very clear that being airborne and being on an attack vector are not the same thing. But this is the factual picture of what is moving in the world right now, 4 hours after those declarations were published.
And I think it's worth saying, Alex, because listeners may be forming mental images of what war looks like from films and television. The reality, especially in the early hours, looks far more like what we're describing. Paperwork, ships leaving ports, planes taking off. It looks procedural. It looks almost quiet from a distance. And that quiet is deceptive because beneath it, decisions are being made right now in rooms we cannot see by people we cannot reach. That will determine what the next hours and days look like for hundreds of millions of people. The residents of Anchorage, Alaska, which is geographically the closest major American city to both Russian and Asian theater operations, have reportedly been reaching out to local emergency management lines in such volume that the phone system there is experiencing delays. We have a correspondent trying to reach Anchorage right now.
6 hours in, the President of the United States has addressed the nation. The address lasted 11 minutes and 40 seconds. I'm going to read the key passages because I think they need to be heard verbatim, or as close to verbatim as our transcription team can manage in real time. The President said, and I quote, "The United States of America does not seek this conflict. We have not provoked it, and we will not be the architects of its escalation. But let me be absolutely clear to the nations that have chosen this path. The United States military is the most capable fighting force in the history of human civilization, and the men and women who wear this uniform do not yield. We will defend our territory. We will defend our allies. And we will respond to any act of aggression against American lives or American soil with the full and overwhelming force at our disposal. To the American people, stay calm, stay informed. Your government is functioning, your military is ready, and I am not going anywhere." The address then ended with the President announcing the activation of the National Guard in all 50 states, the closure of American airspace to all commercial aviation effective immediately, and the elevation of DEFCON status from 3 to 2.
DEFCON 2. Alex, for listeners who didn't know the scale before this morning, DEFCON 2 is one step below 5, which is nuclear war. We have only been at DEFCON 2 once in recorded public history, and that was during the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962. The weight of that comparison is not lost on any of us in the studio. I also want to tell you what is happening on the ground in American cities right now, because it is changing fast. We have correspondents checking in from multiple locations. In Los Angeles, the freeway system is beginning to experience what traffic management calls stress gridlock. That is not a normal rush hour, but a panic-driven surge of people trying to leave coastal areas. The Port of Los Angeles has suspended all outbound civilian shipping. In New York City, the mayor's office has issued a shelter-in-place advisory for Lower Manhattan, specifically citing the concentration of federal infrastructure in that area. The subways are still running. Schools have been closed. In Houston, fuel stations are reporting lines stretching multiple city blocks, and several stations have already run dry.
8 hours in now. We are getting our first reports of actual military engagement. I want to say that very slowly, because it is the sentence I have been hoping we would not have to say today. Our correspondent embedded with U.S. Pacific Command reports that Chinese naval vessels and U.S. Navy destroyers have exchanged fire in the South China Sea, approximately 240 miles southwest of Guam. This is still a developing and unconfirmed picture, but we have it from two independent sources within the last 15 minutes. The exchange reportedly began when a Chinese frigate crossed within what the U.S. Navy designates as a defensive perimeter around a carrier group. Warning shots were fired. The Chinese vessel did not withdraw. Further shots followed. There are no confirmed American casualties at this time. There are no confirmed Chinese casualties at this time. But I need you to understand what this means. This is no longer a war of documents. This is a war of ordnance.
And simultaneously, Alex, and I want to make sure our listeners understand this is all happening at the same time, we are receiving reports from South Korea that North Korean artillery positions along the DMZ, the demilitarized zone that has separated North and South Korea since the armistice of 1953, have begun firing, not warning shots, artillery, into South Korean territory. The city of Chorwan, which sits close to the border, is receiving emergency alerts right now. The mayor of Chorwan has ordered an immediate evacuation of the city's civilian population. That population is approximately 55,000 people. And as they try to move south on roads that were already congested with people who have been worried since this morning, we have a humanitarian crisis beginning to form on top of a military one. We have received our first official casualty report. South Korean authorities are reporting 17 civilians injured and 4 killed in the initial artillery exchange. 4 people. 4 lives, and we are 8 hours into this.
12 hours. The picture is darker now, and I'm not going to soften that for you. In the Pacific Theater, the naval exchange near Guam has expanded. 2 U.S. destroyers, we have not been given their designations yet, have been struck by Chinese anti-ship missiles. One of those ships, our correspondent says, is no longer able to navigate under its own power. We are not reporting casualties from those ships yet, because we do not have confirmed numbers, and in a situation like this, I will not give you a number I can't stand behind. The other ship is operational, but damaged. The U.S. Air Force has responded with strikes on Chinese naval radar installations on artificial islands in the South China Sea, specifically the installations at Fiery Cross Reef and Mischief Reef, both of which are heavily militarized positions that have been in dispute for years. Those strikes were confirmed by the Pentagon in a brief statement 12 minutes ago. In the north, on the Korean Peninsula, the North Korean artillery has not stopped. It has intensified. South Korean and U.S. joint forces have responded with counter-battery fire. The city of Chorwan is effectively abandoned by civilian residents, and we are now receiving reports that the city of Paju, which sits very close to Seoul, is issuing its own evacuation orders. 2 million people live in the greater Paju metropolitan area.
I've been reading listener messages continuously, and I want to share one that arrived 7 minutes ago, because it captures something I think needs to be named. This is from a woman named Elena, who says she is originally from Russia, has lived in Chicago for 20 years, and has become an American citizen. She writes, "I am scared, not because of bombs or missiles. I am scared of what happens to my neighbors when they look at me. I have already had one person shout at me at the grocery store this morning, 'I am American, my children were born here.' But I am afraid of what fear does to people. Please say something about this." Elena, I hear you. And I am saying it now on this frequency to everyone listening. The actions of governments are not the actions of people. The people who came to this country from Russia, from China, from Iran, from North Korea, from anywhere, are not your enemy. Fear has always been the first casualty of war before human beings are. We will not let that happen on this broadcast. We will say it as many times as we have to.
14 hours in. We are now able to report confirmed military engagements in multiple simultaneous theaters. In the Pacific, ongoing. On the Korean Peninsula, ongoing and intensifying. And now in the Middle East. Iranian fast attack boats have moved against U.S. Navy vessels in the Strait of Hormuz, which is the narrow choke point through which approximately 20% of the world's oil passes every day. American patrol vessels have returned fire. 2 Iranian boats have been sunk. 1 American patrol craft has sustained significant damage with injuries reported to its crew. The Strait of Hormuz is now, for the first time in its modern strategic history, an active combat zone. What that means economically, even in the short term, is severe. Oil futures have not just spiked. Trading has been suspended on commodity markets in London and New York because the volatility exceeded every protective circuit breaker on the exchange. We are already looking at the beginning of a global economic disruption that will outlast whatever happens militarily, regardless of how this ends.
And Alex, I want to add something to that economic picture that your listeners need to think about in very practical terms. The American power grid. We are receiving reports from the Department of Homeland Security, not confirmed but being actively investigated, that several power substations in the northeastern United States have experienced what authorities are calling anomalous failures. These are not weather-related outages. These are not aging infrastructure issues. DHS is saying the word cyber in background briefings to journalists right now without going on record. We know that both Russia and China have over many years mapped and in some cases pre-positioned code within critical American infrastructure. What I'm saying is that the war you are hearing about in oceans far from here may also be taking place inside the wires that run electricity to your hospital, your water treatment plant, your fuel distribution system. We don't know the scope yet. We know it is being investigated as of right now.
18 hours. Day 1 is almost gone. I want to do a casualty accounting because I think it's important to mark these moments. The numbers we have confirmed as of this hour. South Korea, military and civilian combined. 112 dead. 467 injured. With those numbers expected to rise significantly as the artillery exchange along the DMZ continues. United States Navy. We now have confirmation of 31 sailors killed and 89 injured across the 2 destroyer engagements near Guam. American patrol craft in the Hormuz. 3 killed, 14 injured. And from civilian infrastructure, we have 11 people dead in the United States attributed to traffic accidents caused by panic-driven gridlock in Los Angeles and Atlanta, and 2 people who died in a stampede at a grocery store in Phoenix, Arizona. That is not a military casualty. That is fear killing people. And I want us to sit with that for a second.
We're now 22 hours in, and I've barely slept, and I don't think that matters right now. I want to tell you about what's happening to ordinary American families because as important as the military picture is, it is not the whole picture. We have reports from FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, that approximately 400,000 people have self-evacuated from coastal areas in California, Washington State, and Hawaii. These are not ordered evacuations. These are people who packed what they could carry and drove inland. The highways heading east from Los Angeles, the I-10, the I-15, the I-40, are experiencing what transportation authorities are calling near-complete gridlock for distances of up to 200 miles from the coast. People are running out of fuel on the road. There are reports of people sleeping in their cars in the Mojave Desert overnight. And the temperature out there last night was 41 degrees Fahrenheit. We have a humanitarian situation developing inside our own borders, driven not by bombs, but by fear. Real, human, understandable fear.
Day 2. 36 hours since the declarations. I need to update you on the situation in Europe because it has changed materially in the last several hours. Russian ground forces have not crossed into any NATO member state's territory, but they have moved. Large armored formations have been observed repositioning along the borders of Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and Poland. These are all NATO members. These are Article 5 nations. An attack on one is an attack on all. That is the foundational commitment of the Atlantic Alliance. NATO Secretary General has convened an emergency session of the North Atlantic Council, which is the alliance's governing body. The session has been ongoing for 11 hours. We don't know what they've decided. We do know that American troop deployments in Germany, specifically the forces stationed at Ramstein Air Base and at several armored cavalry positions in Bavaria, have gone to full combat readiness. We also know that the United Kingdom has recalled Parliament, and the Prime Minister has addressed the House of Commons in a session that was described by our London correspondent as the most sober I have ever witnessed.
And from the civilian side of Europe, the city of Tallinn, Estonia, which has a population of roughly 450,000 people and sits close to the Russian border, is issuing voluntary evacuation guidance for residents in the northeastern part of the city near the Narva River. In Warsaw, Poland, which has a long and devastatingly intimate relationship with what military invasion looks like, the population is behaving with what our correspondent there describes as a kind of quiet, experienced dread. People are lining up at pharmacies for medications. Banks are seeing withdrawal lines. But there are no riots. There is no looting. There is just a people who have been here before, in memory, in history, in the stories their grandparents told, and who know how to move through fear without letting it move through them first.
48 hours, 2 days. I'm going to give you a battlefield update, and it is not good. On the Korean Peninsula, North Korean ground forces, and we are now talking about infantry and armored divisions, not just artillery, have crossed the demilitarized zone at 3 points. South Korean and U.S. joint forces are engaged in active fighting. The city of Kaesong, just across the border in North Korean territory, but near the crossing point, is being used as a staging area. South Korean F-35 aircraft have struck those staging positions. North Korea has responded with short-range ballistic missiles aimed at South Korean air bases. 2 of those missiles were intercepted by the THAAD missile defense system. 1 was not. It struck near Osan Air Base, south of Seoul. The base itself was not destroyed, but the surrounding area sustained significant damage. Confirmed dead from that missile impact: 47 people, a mix of military and civilian. The city of Seoul, population 10 million, one of the most densely populated urban areas on Earth, is now under a formal evacuation order for the districts closest to the northern perimeter of the city.
10 million people. Alex, when you say that number, I want our listeners to actually let that number exist for a moment. 10 million people. The task of moving 10 million people, even in the best of circumstances, with full infrastructure and total cooperation, is staggering. And these are not the best of circumstances. The Korean Expressway system, the Gyeongbu Expressway, the Yeongdong Expressway, these roads were built for a country at peace. They are handling a country at war. Our correspondent in Seoul, who I am not naming because we are keeping her as safe as we can, says the streets look like a river that has decided to run in only one direction, and too fast. She says she watched an elderly man sit down on the sidewalk because he couldn't keep up with the crowd. A stranger stopped and helped him. She watched a woman hand her infant to a soldier so she could help an injured man into a doorway. She says the soldiers look very young.
3 days in, 72 hours. I have a power grid update that is significant, and I need to be precise. In the last 24 hours, confirmed power outages attributable to what DHS is now officially calling coordinated cyber attacks on critical infrastructure have affected parts of the following areas: the Northeastern Power Corridor from Boston to Washington, D.C., which serves approximately 38 million people, portions of the Pacific Northwest grid serving Seattle, Portland, and the surrounding region, and sections of the Texas grid, which is its own independent system, affecting the Dallas-Fort Worth metropolitan area. These are not total blackouts. They are partial, targeted failures that are being managed by grid operators working around the clock. But hospitals are running on backup generators. Water treatment facilities in some areas are operating at reduced capacity. In Boston, the city has issued a boil water advisory for 3 of its districts. People who rely on electrically powered medical equipment at home, dialysis machines, ventilators, oxygen concentrators, are being advised to contact emergency services immediately. We do not have a count yet of how many people that affects, but it is not a small number.
I've been thinking about something as we've been on the air for 3 days, and I want to say it because I think it's honest and because our listeners deserve honesty over performance. When this started, when Alex read those declarations on the first morning, there was a part of my brain that was waiting for the correction, the retraction, though we have learned that these documents were in fact not genuine moment. And it didn't come. It hasn't come. And at some point in the last 72 hours, I think every person in this studio, every person in this country, maybe every person in this world had their own version of that moment. The moment where they accepted that this is real. And I think about what that acceptance costs. Not politically, not strategically, just as a human being accepting that your world has changed. That is a form of grief, and no one should have to carry it alone.
Day 4. The situation in the Pacific has evolved in a way that I need to explain carefully. American and Allied forces, specifically Japanese maritime self-defense force vessels operating alongside the U.S. 7th Fleet, have been conducting what the Pentagon calls sea control operations in the waters between Japan and the Chinese mainland. Significant numbers of Chinese naval vessels have been engaged. We are now receiving estimates. These are preliminary and will be refined of Chinese naval losses that include, according to our Pentagon correspondent, a Chinese destroyer sunk north of the Luzon Strait, 2 Chinese frigates severely damaged, and 1 Chinese submarine that has not been heard from since a sonar contact 3 days ago. American losses in the same period. 1 destroyer sunk, USS Fitzgerald. I can now name that ship because the Navy has released the name, with 44 sailors confirmed dead, and 1 submarine, the USS Nevada, which has sustained damage but is operational. Japanese forces have lost 1 destroyer and 1 frigate, with combined casualties of approximately 90 souls. This is now a major naval war.
We have just received a government statement from the Japanese Prime Minister, and I want to read it in full because it is remarkable in its clarity. The Prime Minister said, and I am reading from our Tokyo Bureau's translation, Japan entered this conflict not because it sought war, but because geography and alliance make neutrality a fiction. We stand with our American allies not out of obligation alone, but out of conviction. The values of open societies, democratic governance, rule of law, peaceful commerce are not Western values. They are human values, and Japan has been their defender before. We will be their defender again. To our people, remember who you are. Japan has risen from worse than this. We will rise again. Alex, that statement is being broadcast on every public information channel in Japan right now.
Day 5. 120 hours into this. I want to give a comprehensive casualty update because I think it is our obligation to do so even when the numbers are hard. South Korea, 4,200 confirmed dead, military and civilian. 22,000 injured. Approximately 4 million displaced from their homes in the northern and central regions. American military, 312 confirmed dead across all theaters. 744 wounded. 1 aircraft carrier, the USS Ronald Reagan, has been struck by 2 cruise missiles and is no longer fully operational. It is being escorted to Guam for emergency repairs. Its crew is largely intact, but the air wing it was carrying has been redistributed to land bases in Japan. Iranian theater, U.S. forces, and allied Gulf state navies have effectively sealed the Strait of Hormuz to Iranian naval operations. But the cost of that operation has been 18 American dead and 101 wounded. Iran itself has suffered significant military losses. Their frigate Sahand has been sunk. 3 fast attack boat squadrons have been destroyed, and Iranian air defense positions along the Gulf Coast have been struck repeatedly.
Day 6. I want to talk about refugees, not statistics. People. The United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees has issued an emergency declaration covering the Korean Peninsula, and they are now coordinating what they are calling the largest single-nation civilian displacement since the Second World War. 4 million South Koreans have been confirmed as internally displaced. Approximately 300,000 have crossed into Japan by ferry, Coast Guard vessel, fishing boat, and any other floating structure they could find. Japan is receiving them. Japanese communities in Fukuoka and Osaka are opening community centers, schools, gymnasiums, anything with a roof. We received a report from a volunteer coordinator in Fukuoka who told our correspondent, yesterday a grandmother arrived with 6 grandchildren and nothing else. No papers, no bag, no shoes for 2 of the smaller children. She sat down on the dock and she looked around like she was trying to find something familiar. And one of our volunteers, a young man maybe 20 years old, sat down next to her and didn't say anything. Just sat there. And she reached over and held his hand. That volunteer's name, our correspondent told us, was Kenji. And I am going to remember that name.
We're now at day 7, 1 week. I want to step back and give you the geopolitical overview, because this is not just a story of bullets and ships. This is a story of an international order that has held since 1945, being tested in a way it has never been tested before. The United Nations Security Council has been unable to act because Russia and China both have permanent veto power on that body, and they are using it. The UN General Assembly has passed a non-binding resolution calling for an immediate ceasefire by a vote of 131 to 9. It is non-binding, meaning it carries moral weight, but no enforcement mechanism. What it tells us is how the world perceives this conflict. Most of the world's nations, including those who have complicated relationships with American foreign policy, have voted to say, stop. The economies of 12 nations are already in technical recession as a direct result of the disruption to global trade, energy markets, and financial systems caused by this first week of conflict. The global price of fuel has more than tripled. Food commodity prices are rising sharply because of disruptions to shipping routes.
Day 8. We have our first confirmed report of nuclear-related posturing, and I want to address it directly rather than let it sit in the background creating anxiety. Russia has moved what American intelligence officials are describing as mobile, nuclear-capable missile systems in the Kaliningrad enclave. This is Russian territory that sits between Poland and Lithuania, inside NATO's geographic sphere, into what is being called elevated readiness. These are not launches. There are no launches. There have been no nuclear detonations anywhere on Earth. What this is, as far as our nuclear security analysts can explain, is a form of strategic signaling. Russia is reminding NATO and reminding the United States that it possesses these weapons. The American response, confirmed this morning, is that the U.S. strategic nuclear forces have gone to their highest level of readiness short of launch authorization. The missiles are not flying, but they are ready. And the world is aware of that in a way it has not been for more than half a century.
Day 10. 2 weeks is approaching, and the conflict has settled into something that military historians will likely call a multi-theater war of attrition. Let me walk through each front. On the Korean Peninsula, North Korean ground advances have been contained. Joint U.S. and South Korean forces reinforced by units airlifted from bases in Japan and from the continental United States, have established what is being called a main line of resistance, approximately 40 kilometers north of Seoul. The North Korean advance has stopped. It has not been reversed. That distinction matters. The city of Seoul is a war zone in its northern districts. Buildings that were offices and apartments 2 weeks ago are now fortified positions. The Han River, which bisects Seoul, has been declared a military control zone. 6 of its bridges have been destroyed by North Korean missile fire and by deliberate demolition by South Korean engineers to slow an advance that never quite reached them.
Day 11. I want to read another listener message because I have been collecting them and some of them are extraordinary. This one comes from a man who says his name is James and he is a high school history teacher in Columbus, Ohio. He writes, "Every day my students ask me what this is like compared to what we study. I've been teaching about World War II for 15 years. I always thought it was remote, historical, something that happened to other people in black and white photographs. And now my students are living a version of it, in color, and I don't know what to tell them that is true and also survivable. So I just try to be honest. I tell them, people have been through worse and held on to their humanity, and some of them held on to it brilliantly. And that's the assignment. Hold on to it." James from Columbus, Ohio. I think that might be the best thing anyone has said on this broadcast.
Day 12. We have an update from the European theater that is significant. After 11 days of observable military buildup without crossing NATO's borders, Russian forces have made their move. But it is not the move anyone predicted. Instead of a frontal assault on the Baltic states, Russian Special Operations Forces, what are known as Spetsnaz, have conducted operations inside 3 Latvian cities, Riga, Daugavpils, and Rezekne. These are not full-scale invasions. They are targeted seizures of telecommunications infrastructure, power distribution nodes, and government buildings in those cities. Latvia has declared a state of emergency. Article 5 of the NATO treaty has been formally invoked for the first time in the alliance's history. The words I am about to read were issued by the NATO Secretary General 1 hour ago. The North Atlantic Council has determined that an armed attack has been carried out against Latvia, a member of the alliance. The collective defense provisions of the Washington Treaty are hereby activated. All member states are now committed to the defense of Latvia and to the restoration of its territorial integrity. 48 seconds. That's how long it took him to read those words. 48 seconds to change the world again.
Day 14. 2 weeks. I've been trying to keep track of the ways ordinary life has changed in ordinary places because I think in the historical record that matters as much as the military movements. In the United States, 31 states have activated their National Guards. Food rationing guidance has been issued by FEMA. It is guidance, not a legal requirement, but grocery stores in 6 major cities have implemented per-customer purchase limits on fuel, bottled water, canned goods, and medications. The American stock market has not reopened since day 3. Banks are operating on modified hours and have implemented withdrawal limits. The internet is functioning, but major social media platforms have been operating under emergency government guidance that has generated significant civil liberties debate. A debate that I think matters even now, and that we will not pretend away. The Constitution does not stop mattering in a crisis. In fact, it matters more.
Day 16. I have a significant update on the Iranian theater that will affect the global oil picture. American naval forces, in coordination with Saudi Arabian and Emirati air power, have conducted a sustained 48-hour operation that has effectively neutralized the Iranian Navy as a functioning force. Iranian surface vessels have been sunk or forced into harbor. Their naval air arm has sustained losses estimated at 60% of its operational aircraft. The Strait of Hormuz is being declared by the U.S. Navy as under Allied control, though Iranian shore-based missile batteries still pose a threat to shipping. What this means practically: oil tankers have begun moving through the strait again, under naval escort. Global oil prices, which had risen to $230 per barrel, have dropped sharply on the news. This will not fix the economic damage that has already been done, but it changes the trajectory.
Day 17. I need to update the casualty numbers, and I want to do it in a way that honors what those numbers represent. As of the latest confirmed tallies from international and domestic reporting agencies, the following are the confirmed dead across all theaters. South Korea, approximately 34,000 military and civilian combined. That number includes an unknown but significant proportion of civilians who died not from weapons directly, but from the collapse of medical services in the conflict zone, from exposure, from the disruption of insulin and dialysis supply chains. United States military dead, 1,463. That is a number that will be read aloud in a future ceremony in a place not yet built. Japan, 412. Latvia, an unknown number still being assessed as active operations are ongoing in the cities where fighting is most intense. North Korean casualties are unverified, but international estimates range from 25,000 to 40,000 military dead, with civilian numbers deeply uncertain due to the closed nature of that state and the destruction of communications infrastructure in border regions.
Day 19. We have news from the Korean Peninsula that is the most significant development since the initial crossings. Joint U.S. and South Korean forces, in a coordinated offensive that appears to have been planned for at least the past week, have launched a major counter-offensive north of the main line of resistance. The objective, as described by the Joint Chiefs in a press briefing this morning, is to push North Korean forces back to the pre-war line and to destroy the artillery positions that have been firing on South Korean cities since day one. The operation is called, and the Pentagon has released this name, Operation Resolute Shield. It involves approximately 90,000 U.S. and South Korean troops, significant air support from bases in Japan and Okinawa, and naval gunfire support from the 7th Fleet. We do not know how this will go. We are watching it with every instrument we have.
Day 20. I want to talk about something that has been building for a long time in this broadcast and I think needs to be said clearly. People have been extraordinary. Not everyone, not in every moment, not perfectly, but in the aggregate. The response of human beings to these 3 weeks has been extraordinary. I'm not talking about governments. I'm talking about people. The volunteer networks that have organized food distribution in 20 American cities. The amateur radio operators who have been relaying communications in areas where the grid went down. The teachers who kept showing up. The nurses who have been working shifts that no labor agreement could justify. The ferry captains in Busan who have made 37 round trips to bring people across to Japan and gone back for more. The ordinary people in Warsaw who opened their apartments to Latvian refugees without being asked by anyone. These are not small things. These are the things that determine whether civilization is a noun or a verb.
Day 21. I want to update the infrastructure picture in the continental United States because it has evolved significantly in ways that affect daily life for millions of people. The cyber attack-related power outages in the Northeast and Pacific Northwest have been largely, though not completely, restored. Grid engineers working under military escort and with federal emergency authority have managed to isolate and repair the majority of the targeted substations. The boil water advisory in Boston has been lifted. In Texas, the Dallas-Fort Worth restoration is still approximately 70% complete, meaning roughly 1 million people remain without full, reliable power. FEMA has established 17 distribution centers in Texas, providing water, emergency food supplies, and critical medical needs. The Internet, though functional, is operating with what engineers describe as reduced resilience margins. meaning that another major cyber attack targeting different nodes could produce cascading effects. This is not a threat. This is a known vulnerability that is being actively patched.
Day 21 continued. I want to note something that does not make the military briefings, but that I think is just as important. American communities near military bases, places like Fayetteville in North Carolina, Killeen in Texas, Oceanside in California, have been living a particular kind of suspended grief for 3 weeks now. These are towns where the deployment orders have already gone out, where the buses have already taken people away, where every ring of a phone carries a weight that most people will not understand until they've lived it. We received a message from a woman in Fayetteville. She signed it a soldier's wife, third time, and she said, "I've done this before. I knew the sound of the door at the end of the night when he's not behind it. I knew how to sleep through it the first 2 times. I don't know how to sleep through it this time. It's different when the whole country is awake with me." She's right that it's different. And I don't think she should have to explain why.
Day 22. Operation Resolute Shield has achieved its initial objectives. North Korean forces have been pushed back across the pre-war line of demarcation in 3 of 4 operational sectors. The 4th sector, the western corridor near the Han River estuary, remains contested. The artillery positions that were shelling Seoul have been destroyed or captured in approximately 70% of cases. The shelling of Seoul has effectively stopped. The city is beginning to breathe again. Not safely. There is still sporadic fire. There are still mines in the northern districts. There are still soldiers in the streets. But the existential threat to Seoul has been substantially reduced. The South Korean government, which has been operating from a dispersed command structure since day 3, has issued a formal statement calling the situation a turning point and declaring that the territorial integrity of South Korea has been preserved. 4 million displaced people are now being told that they may begin the process of return.
Day 23. In Latvia, the situation has shifted dramatically overnight. NATO forces from primarily German armored units that crossed into Latvia from Lithuania, together with American airborne troops who began arriving on day 14, have engaged and in most cases expelled Russian special operations forces from the 3 cities they had seized. The fighting in Riga was described by our correspondent there as 3 days of close urban combat in a beautiful medieval city that will take years to repair. The old city of Riga, which is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, has sustained significant damage. Buildings that were standing for 600 years have been damaged or destroyed. That is not just an architectural loss. That is a loss of human memory. The Russian forces that occupied those buildings and chose to fight from within them made a decision, and the cost of that decision will be measured in stone and in lives for generations.
Day 25. Let me give you the diplomatic picture, because this is where the ending of this story, whatever the ending is, will be written. China has been in back-channel communications with American diplomatic representatives through a third-party intermediary, reportedly the Swiss Federal Council, which has historically served this function. We do not know the substance of those communications. What we know is that the pace of Chinese naval operations in the South China Sea has noticeably decreased in the last 72 hours. The carrier groups that were positioned aggressively in the early days of the conflict have moved to positions that analysts describe as less immediately threatening. This is not peace, but it might be the beginning of space where peace could exist. Russia has made no similar signals publicly, but we note that the Spetsnaz forces in Latvia are being withdrawn under military pressure, and no new military crossings of NATO borders have taken place.
Day 27. I want to take a moment, and Alex, I think we owe this to our listeners, to talk about what this has done to people's sense of the world, because we're nearing a month now, and I've been reading listener messages every day, and something has shifted in them. In the first week, people were asking what to do, In the second week, they were asking why this happened. In the third week, the messages started asking what comes after. What does the world look like when this is over? What do we rebuild? What has been permanently lost? And I don't have easy answers. But I think the asking itself is important. A person who is asking what comes after has already decided there will be an after, and I find that remarkable.
Day 28. 4 weeks. We are approaching the conclusion of this first month. And I want to be honest that what I am about to describe is not a happy ending. It is a factual one. The conflict is not over. But its character has changed decisively in the last 72 hours. The Chinese government has formally entered into ceasefire negotiations with the United States, mediated by Switzerland. Those negotiations are ongoing. A preliminary agreement, a cessation of offensive operations rather than a formal ceasefire, which requires more paperwork, has been observed in the South China Sea for the last 48 hours. No Chinese or American naval vessels have exchanged fire in 2 days. Russian forces, having failed to hold positions in Latvia and facing the activated Article 5 collective response of 30 NATO members, have also entered into preliminary diplomatic communications. Iranian military capacity has been, to use the Pentagon's terminology, degraded to a non-threatening level for the foreseeable future. North Korean forces have been pushed back across the border, and while no formal armistice exists, there has been no new North Korean crossing in 6 days.
Day 29. I have some specific and important information to share. The government of South Korea has formally requested and been granted emergency international reconstruction assistance from the United Nations, Japan, the European Union, and the United States. The reconstruction of the northern districts of Seoul, of the city of Cheorwan, and of dozens of smaller communities along the DMZ corridor will take years. The government of Latvia has issued a formal declaration that it will rebuild Riga's old city stone by stone, if that is what it takes. And they will get help. 14 NATO nations have pledged reconstruction aid in the last 48 hours. The Korean refugee population, those 4 million people who fled south, is beginning to move back to their homes, though enormous numbers of those homes in the conflict zone have been damaged or destroyed. The logistics of that return are staggering and heartbreaking in equal measure.
Day 30. This is our final accounting. I want to be precise because I believe that the people who died in this conflict deserve precision. Over the course of 30 days of warfare across multiple theaters, the confirmed global death toll stands at the following. South Korea, 51,312 confirmed dead, with an estimated further 12,000 to 20,000 deaths attributable to infrastructure collapse, medical access failure, and displacement-related causes that are being counted separately. United States military, 1,708 confirmed dead. Japan, 644. Latvia, 911 military and civilian combined. North Korea. The figure is genuinely unknown because the North Korean government has released no information and independent verification is impossible. But international intelligence assessments place the number between 50,000 and 70,000, the majority military. Iran, military casualties estimated at 6,000 to 9,000. Chinese military, approximately 3,000 confirmed through vessel losses and air combat, with additional unreported casualties likely.
And I want to name what was lost beyond the lives. The northern districts of Seoul will not be fully inhabited again for at least 2 years. The old city of Riga will never fully be what it was. Some of what was destroyed cannot be rebuilt, only replaced. The economic damage to the global trading system, to supply chains, to energy markets, to financial systems will take an estimated decade to fully resolve, according to preliminary analyses from international financial institutions. The American power grid, in the areas that sustain cyber attack damage, will require up to 3 years of systematic rebuilding. The trust between nations, the fragile, imperfect, absolutely necessary web of agreements and relationships and common expectations that allows 7 billion people to coexist on one planet, has been damaged in ways that are harder to measure than a watt or a dollar.
What ultimately caused this? The analysts and historians who will write about this for the rest of this century will not agree on a single cause. They will write about decades of strategic competition, about economic rivalry, about the decline of multilateral institutions, about the particular pressures of a moment in which multiple nations felt simultaneously that the international order no longer served them and that they had the capacity to change it. They will not be entirely wrong about any of those things. What I can tell you is what we observed in 30 days of live coverage, a crisis that no single decision caused and no single decision ended. A war that was built over decades and fought over weeks. And that ended, if ended is the right word, not with a peace treaty, but with a mutual exhaustion, a recognition by every party that the cost of continuing was higher than any achievable objective.
And what remains? This is the question I think about most. What remains is improbably most of it. The institutions are damaged but standing. The alliances are strained but unbroken. South Korea is wounded but sovereign. Latvia is wounded but sovereign. The United States is wounded but functioning, not perfectly, not as it was, but functioning. Japan showed a grace under pressure that I don't think it will forget about itself for a very long time. The volunteers in Fukuoka fed people they had never met. The teachers kept showing up. The nurses worked the impossible shifts. The ferry captains went back for more. A young man named Kenji sat down next to a grandmother on a dock in a city that wasn't hers and held her hand.
I want to end with a piece of information that is straightforward and unadorned, because I think it deserves to be. The ceasefire framework between the United States, China, and Russia was formally signed 48 hours ago. It is imperfect. It does not resolve the underlying disputes about Taiwan, about NATO's eastern borders, about Iranian regional ambitions, about North Korean nuclear capability. Those issues remain. They will require years of careful, patient, unglamorous diplomatic work to address. The hard work of peace is slower and less dramatic than the fast work of war. But the guns have stopped. As of midnight last night, across all 4 theaters of this conflict, the guns have stopped.
To the 51,300 people in South Korea who did not see this day, we are sorry. To the 1,708 American service members who gave everything, we are grateful in a way that language is too small to hold. To the 900 people in Latvia who defended a city and a way of life in the streets of a city their grandparents built, you will not be forgotten. To the hundreds of thousands of North Korean soldiers whose names we will never know, caught in a war they did not choose and served in a system that gave them no choice, we grieve for what was done in your name and to you. And to everyone listening to this broadcast right now, everyone who stayed tuned in, who needed facts in the darkness, who needed a voice that would not flinch, thank you. This has been Sierra Lane.
And this has been Alex Mercer. You have been listening to Silent Waves Radio. We will continue to broadcast. We will continue to verify. We will continue to tell you what is real. Stay close to each other. That is always the best advice. That is the only advice that never goes out of date.